First, a little bit of background. My sister and I come from a big family, and we have lots of cousins with lots of kids. In 2018, our grandparents died, so everybody is still a bit sad, but we all are dealing however we can. Now with the story. One night, I was alone at the house. My sister was out working, and I would be too if it wasn't for my aunt and my mom that left the wood door closed, but not the crystal one, and I couldn't go out because I had no keys to close it. So no one coming from the back door could come in, but from the main door someone could. They couldn't go earlier to do the groceries anyway, because my sister and I were taking care of our little cousin, and if they left, she would notice and start crying. So I decided to take it easy and start playing some games on my phone while I wait. Suddenly, I started listening to a guitar, but it was so low I had to put the phone closer to my ear. While I'm doing that, I start thinking my phone has no volume because I had in fact silenced it. I go to the balcony and check that there's no one playing the guitar outside. I decide to think that it's an auditory hallucination. The first time it's ever happened to me in my 21 years of being alive, but it makes sense. After a while, I start hearing the sound of the chairs downstairs moving. Not that creepy, because there are like 4 cats that like to sleep in the chairs, so it's okay, I guess. Creepy that there are 2 chairs moving at the same time, but okay. Then, someone knocks on the crystal door. From the top of the stairs, I look down and see no one close to the door. I don't even go downstairs. I go straight up to the room to check the balcony. No one in that door. I go to the other room that's up by the wood door, and no one there either. I decide to lie on the bed again, thinking I must have misheard everything. And then I fucking heard it. I heard my 4-year-old cousin laughing downstairs. At this point, I stop moving, and I text a friend that I'm scared. I tell her that the house is big, 2 floors, and I decide to stop being scared, that I should give her a house tour. Never in my life have I been so brave, because my sister, my father, and one of my cousins have seen ghosts. So yeah, I do believe in them. But I decided to go check anyway. I go turning on every single light I can. By the time I get there, there's really no one. I go back upstairs and have the courage to turn all the lights off, since my aunt gets angry when the lights are on unnecessarily. I don't hear a sound anymore until my mom and my aunt are back from the supermarket.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
I'm Native American. I know this sounds like lots of tribes, but most of my Cherokee blood comes from my mother's side, and the Western blood comes from my father's side. All in all, I'm a half Indigenous person as far as blood is concerned, although I'm a full-time, culturally involved Native American individual. My girlfriend is also. She's a Chickasaw. When it comes to the area of the country that I live, if you don't run across very many Native people, this leads to most natives in this area knowing most other natives in the area. There's one of these natives who worries me to the core. He's a very old Indian who has been all over the country and settled a stone's throw away from a river in a small shack with 2 dogs and 1 cat. He seems like an innocent old Indian man, but he's very dangerous, and he's not a good person. I've only been to his shack once. My girlfriend used to be good friends with this old fellow because he seemed like an innocent old native elder. At some point, she let him borrow something, and a long time after realizing this person was bad news, she needed it back. We jumped in the car and went to pay this old man a visit for the sole reason of getting her charger back. We drove down the winding, beautiful roads of Middle Tennessee and onto a farm. We got out, and he wasn't at home yet, so I walked around his front yard. There was an old dog chained to an umbrella next to his food and water, a derelict old pickup truck that hadn't been driven in a long time, with a really skinny cat hiding underneath it, and a little chicken coop. The whole place gave me a great amount of discomfort before he ever arrived, and knowing that this man did very bad medicine on people didn't help my nerves. He bragged about being able to kill a car on the road with his medicine. He also bragged about being a shapeshifter. At some point, I noticed the old dog chained to the umbrella began to have a panic attack, and the skinny cat under the truck no longer wanted to feel the embrace of a human hand, and retreated back into the unreachable refuge of the truck's rotting drive shaft. I didn't know what had caused this sudden shift in nature's mood until I looked down the dusty gravel road and saw a beat-up old Dodge pickup round to the corner and make its way toward the shack. He got out and invited us inside. The shack was cramped and somewhat smelly. I still don't know how two people lived there. The pit bull in the kennel inside the shotgun shack was losing its mind, so we let it out into the yard. He gave us a biscuit recipe, showed off his drum that plays itself at night unless it has a blanket over it, and invited us outside to talk for a minute. Once outside, he told us of how he used medicine to kill several people a long time ago. His eyes were dead. He had cold black eyes that had a silver ring around them. The only person I've ever seen like that. My girlfriend and I left right after that with the charger. A couple of weeks later, I was coming home at about midnight. My car has HIDs, so I can normally see pretty far at night. As I made my way down the gravel road that leads to my driveway, and into my driveway, I didn't see anything. I got out of my car and went to my passenger side door to get something out of my seat. That's when I noticed a huge, scraggly canine as tall as my mailbox standing in the gravel. All my hair stood on end like I'd just been electrocuted. Where was it a second ago when my lights were in that same spot? It was locked into me. I yelled at it, and it walked a little further down the gravel, keeping an eye on me. Then it began to walk toward me. I yelled again and grabbed something from my seat. And when I turned around, it was gone. No noises, just gone. That's what it's actually like to encounter a skinwalker. It's a whole lot more than a twig snapping, but also less sometimes.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
The day we moved into the second house my parents bought, my grandpa died. It was a brand new house and no one had died in it or anything, but for some reason, I always got a very eerie feeling from the second we moved in. The first weekend we moved in, my grandma stayed in her room, and she mentioned to us that she kept hearing an old-timey telephone coming from the closet. No one's phone had rang that night, so we just thought it was weird, but thought nothing of it. Over the years, she and anyone else that stayed in that room would experience the same thing every time they stayed in the room. After a few years, my sister and I couldn't get along, and my mom designated the guest bathroom as my bathroom, so there'd no longer be arguments and touching each other's stuff. At night, I wouldn't use the bathroom and just use my sister's, because it would creep me out so badly. When I would shower, I would hear my name being called, knocking coming from the guest room closet, very distinct knocking on the door, and the knob would sound like someone was messing with it. At first I thought it was just my sister fucking with me, but after a few times of me experiencing those things whenever I was in the house alone, I knew it wasn't her. Everyone but my mom's wife thought I was crazy when I'd tell them what I'd hear. Around the same time that was really kicking up, my mom would ask us if we were in the guest room at night, because she could hear someone walking in there all hours of the night. There was only one time it was actually us in there, but every other time we just thought she was crazy and figured she was just imagining things. Then one night, my mom and I were in her room watching movies, and we kept hearing something walking around upstairs. All the animals were with us, and the door to that room was always closed, so they couldn't get in there. She paused the movie so she could go smoke, and we heard very heavy walking upstairs when we started to walk out of the room. We stood there for a minute and continued for another 30 seconds or so. I'd always hated that house, but I hated it even more after that.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
Not a trucker, but I have 2 paranormal driving stories. One morning, I got in my car about to head to work. I had a sense of a small boy sitting in the middle of my back seat. I couldn't recognize who it was, age, era, etc. And I couldn't physically see or hear this entity. It was just a feeling of a presence. It said nothing and stayed there for only about a minute. I had an overwhelming urge to tighten my seatbelt super tight as I could possibly get it, in order to feel snug and secure. I've never done this before or since this one time. It's not a normal behaviour, and I felt like I had to do it. On my way to work, someone didn't stop before crossing the highway. It's the person at 65 miles an hour, spun, and ended up in the centre median. I walked away with just a bit tongue. Story 2. I was at a friend's house and we ordered a pizza. My friend and I hopped in his car as we drove to pick up the pizza. When we drove across Broadway, I felt this overwhelming darkness looming in the area of the intersection. It didn't feel like before. No kid in the back seat. Just a darkness looming over that area. I couldn't tell how soon something bad was going to happen. Minutes, hours, days, weeks, etc. No idea. It's also not a feeling I've had before or since. We drove across Broadway on our way to the pizza place, about a mile down the road. I kind of felt like writing it down on a piece of paper. There's going to be an accident here. But it felt kind of foolish having no sense of the feeling in terms of context or time. We picked up the pizza and drove back. On our way through the intersection, a lady stopped at the light, took off and drove right in front of us. We hit her car and came to a stop at the intersection. Now here's the odd part. The lady was stopped in the turn lane waiting to go the same direction we were. She took off on red on active cross traffic. She also drove straight rather than taking her planned turn. I even asked the lady why she went, and she said she had no idea why she went. It wasn't even an intentional act for her. These both happened long ago in my youth. I'm about 40 now. These things aren't any kind of normal occurrence, gift or sight. They were very unique instances, alone in their own space. No repeats, no similarities. And kind of, sadly, nothing new. But then again, I guess I'd need to have another accident to have it.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
I have 2 stories. Once I was hauling agriculture near a farm in the Sacramento Delta area, around 3:30 or 4 a.m. It was pitch black and an owl flew in front of me and then took a hard right so that it was flying in the same direction right in front of my windshield. Sadly, it wasn't flying as fast as my truck, and the owl hit the windshield hard and then tumbled and got caught in the driver's side rear view mirror, a foot away from my face. A small droplet of the owl's blood dripped onto my window, and he just stared at me and died. He was stuck, and I wasn't about to touch him because I was scared beyond words. After a few miles of this, he slowly fell off. It was disturbing. Another time, it was pitch black in the middle of the night. I was travelling on Interstate 5 in the Central Valley on a relatively empty road. In the other lane, which was elevated by about 30 yards and separated by another 30 yards of grass and dirt, I saw the single headlight of a motorcycle coming around the bend far ahead of me. As I travelled fast and he travelled fast, our paths were getting closer, but he didn't make the turn with the gentle curve of the road. Instead, and this happened right around the time or after I had just passed them, I saw the headlight bounce wildly, as if he had fallen asleep and driven straight off the freeway. I didn't see him and wasn't sure if my eyes were fooling me. I called it in on the CB and wasn't sure if what I saw had happened or if they ever found him or anything. I may have seen someone perish, or I may have imagined the whole thing.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
A good friend of mine told me this story years ago. He's a stereotypical old, big, bad trucker. I've seen some weird stuff with him while driving in South Texas along the border. He never batted an eye, but while telling me this story, he had goosebumps and a concerned expression, which from this guy is about the equivalent of a trembling lip and shit-stained pants. I'll tell this story in the first person, as he told it to me. Years ago in the late 90s, I was on my way home to the house, heading to Laredo to pick up a load. It was early morning, around 4 or 5. I had just come off a string of days at home, so I know I wasn't tired. I'm on one of those 2-lane winding roads in the absolute middle of bumfuck nowhere, when I see something on the side of the road at the edge of my high beams. At first I just thought it was roadkill, as is usually the case. As I get closer, I see that it is roadkill, and there's someone crouching over the deer carcass. I remember thinking either this guy's taken the antlers as a trophy, or he's fucking sick. As I got closer still, I can now see that this guy's eating the fucking deer. He's pulling chunks of meat from the stomach and bringing them up to his face. At this point, he stops mid-motion and looks up at me. Not at my truck, but at me. He or it stands up, and that's when I see that it's fucking huge, brown, and covered in hair. I remember thinking at this point, oh fuck, this thing is standing on the tiny shoulder looking at me. By this point, maybe 3 seconds have passed, and I'm about to the point in the road he's standing at. I didn't even think of stopping. In fact, I'm starting to lay on it and get the hell out of there. As I'm passing, it's looking at me. Again, not at the truck. It's looking through the driver's windshield at me. He obviously has the intelligence to know that there's a driver in here and knows where I'm sitting. As I start to pass him, I can still see its head above the hood of an old needle-nosed Pete. This thing is fucking giant. I remember seeing what looked like human intelligence in its eyes. It scares the shit out of me.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
A few months back, I was taking a race hauler back east from California. I was on the I-10 in New Mexico. I got tired and decided to stop off on a ramp. In parts of New Mexico, there are off-ramps that are literally nothing more than an off and off ramp. No roads to take when you exit. They typically have wide shoulders, and I didn't consider it an unsafe place to stop. When I took the exit, there was a small travel trailer pulled over, and it appeared the driver was getting some sleep. So I felt better not really being the only one out in the middle of nowhere. I slept for 3 or 4 hours and woke up. It was still very dark out and cold. I looked in my mirror and noticed the camper was gone. I don't remember how long I sat there, maybe a few minutes. And then I looked in my mirror again and noticed a vehicle very close to the rear of my trailer with no lights on. Honestly, I saw the silhouette and thought it was a cop. Didn't think much of it. Figured he was taking a break or maybe even running my plates, as the rig I had was expensive and quite commonly stolen. A few more minutes passed and I saw the headlights flash. Unsure of what was happening, I turned on the truck and prepared to get the hell out of there. The headlights quickly flashed 2 more times, and then I heard a door slam. An older Chevy Silverado took off past me and crossed over the highway and headed west on 10. I waited about 5 minutes, and after turning on all the exterior lights, I walked around the truck. The best I can tell, they were planning to siphon diesel out of my tanks. The cap was off the right side tank, and also the side entry door had pry marks near the hatch. Still freaks me out a bit, and I'm more careful of where I stop these days.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
Frankly speaking, I've never experienced any kind of supernatural or paranormal thing, and this is the main reason why I was hesitating before writing. But here we go. I'm interested in your thoughts and comments on this story. The beginning of the story starts 1.5 years ago. My girlfriend and I went on vacation to an Eastern European country. The exact location is not important, but the site was around 500 kilometers from our home. We had agreed with one of my distant relatives that we were going to stay at their house during the last 2 days of the vacation. His house was not far from where we had spent our vacation. To put into context the circumstances, they live in a very small countryside village in the middle of a vast forest. The village has around 400 inhabitants, so a really tiny one. The first day and night went just fine and dandy, but we agreed that they were going to leave the house on our last day because they had to go to another relative or something like that, meaning that we had been left on our own in the house for the last night. End of the background story. Things are getting tenser now. So we were not in the house during the daytime. We only arrived back around 7 or 8 p.m. in the evening. Just right after we entered the house, we were getting a very strange feeling. Both of us simultaneously. They were not any extraordinary or odd things, not even a single voice. All calm, but we felt an utter fear. I mean, literally. It came from nowhere, out of the blue, but the feeling was very intense. We even went out to the courtyard to get some fresh air. Went back, but the situation wasn't getting any better. I can't explain why we were so frightened of what caused the experience, but it was terrible. We felt like we were in some sort of danger. Even considered leaving the house and going home during the evening, but the home was about 450 kilometers away, and we were very tired at that point. Eventually, we went back into the house, locked the door, and tried to get some sleep. Unsurprisingly, it didn't work, because we were completely frightened and we just sat in silence and listened. To be honest, I get goosebumps when I think about it. There was no voice, no knock, nothing but that very bad feeling, like something very bad is going to happen. We were so frightened. Eventually, we fell asleep, and nothing happened during the night, but in the morning, we packed our stuff as fast as we could, and off we went. Well, we have no explanation for the story. I've never experienced such a thing before, and it was shocking. I know it's not only shocking, but unbelievable as well. I did mention this experience to my relatives, though.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
Let me start out by saying I live in Massachusetts. Normally people think one of the 4 locations wise for Massachusetts: Boston, Cape Cod, Salem and the rest. The rest I have taken to calling spooky woods. This is about some spooky woods in western Massachusetts. I bought my house almost exactly a year ago. It's a 2-story brick square that was built in 1920. A lot of people think it had a commercial use before it was used as a house. It's almost 500 feet away from the road, with a gravel drive that I and delivery peeps don't much care for. I've seen a couple things out of the corner of my eye, like a brown cat. The only thing my cats have ever alerted me to has been a mouse in the walls. But the most important detail is that my backyard is woods. My backyard is a conservation area, so it won't ever be developed into housing. I've seen bears, deer, bobcats, opossums, owls, and lots of other little critters. I've heard even more, which brings me to an event that happened about a couple weeks ago. Actually, thinking better of it, it happened at the end of autumn, when my partner found a fairy ring of mushrooms, and not only stepped into the middle, but also poked every mushroom there. Thanks, darling. Why not just leave the door open for the fae to show up? Anyway, since he's played with the fairy circle, I have kept an ear and eye out for weirdness and pretty much said to the woods that his prodding was not an invitation inside. Then winter came and it got cold here, and it still is. On this night, a couple weeks ago, it was about 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning. The temperature was a single digit, but my phone said it felt like -3. Both me and my partner woke up together for no real reason that we were able to figure out. We have neighbours to the sides of us, but they're quiet at night. Our other neighbour is right by the road. We acknowledge that we're awake to each other. One of the cats is very excited we're awake and wants to cuddle. We're unsuccessfully trying to push him away when we all hear it. Whistling. It was so light that the cat's purrs were able to block it out. But he stopped purring, and we all heard the whistling in the woods. It was a jaunty little tune, like someone enjoying a stroll, except it was ridiculously cold out, and it was coming from the woods. It only lasted for a few seconds, and then the cat went back to purring and blocked it out even longer. Haven't heard it since. Part of me likes to think it has a happy custodian in high school, that I think sometimes just barely hear the loud pet rallies of. But the larger part knows I call these spooky woods for a reason.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
This story was around 5 years ago, but both me and my mum remember it to this day. My mum was picking me up from my high school at the time. The school day ended at around 2:30, and we were driving into town, which was about 10 or 12 minutes away from the school. On the way into town, you have to cross over one of the little wooden bridges that goes over a small river. Keep in mind, there's only one bridge on this road, with sugarcane fields and gullies off on both sides of the road, before and after the bridge. I remember passing over the bridge before looking at the clock, where it read 2:46 p.m. We were talking about a bullying situation that happened at school that day, and about 2 minutes after we crossed the bridge, she said something along the lines of, "So your teacher dealt with the situation?" And as I was about to respond, the tyres lost grip of the road, and we spun out with tyres skidding and everything. The car behind us started honking their horn, and we screamed as we thought we were heading first into a gully next to the sugarcane. Then we just weren't. We were back on the road, but it looked like and felt super unfamiliar to us. As we were trying to get our bearings, with her still driving, but a bit slower, we both froze as we saw the bridge that we'd just passed a couple minutes prior, about 200 metres on the road in front of us. I started screaming again and freaking out, before looking over at the time that read 2:45 p.m. I screamed even louder and was really scared, but my mum pulled over and started to explain to me that it was just a glitch in the Matrix, and that it's happened to her before. I just remember the feeling I had afterwards, this feeling that everything was off and didn't feel right, like I was somewhere I wasn't meant to be. And even to this day, I haven't been able to shake that feeling. I managed to calm down, but no one I told believed me. To this day, everyone just thinks it's a silly story, but we both remember the details of it so vividly. The feeling of not belonging is somewhat eased, and I can ignore it now, but it's still an itching thing in the back of my head. It's very hard to explain. That was my introduction to glitches in the Matrix and paranormal activity, which led me down the rabbit hole of Mandela effects, ghost stories, more glitches in the Matrix, to actually watching the Matrix series. I've had other really weird events happen to me in my life since, but nothing as prominent as that one was.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
I'm of Cherokee ancestry, so I have assumed in some way this experience is linked to my ancestry, but it can also be linked to the land attempting to protect two innocent and stupid young adults. When I was 21, I decided along with a friend to go ghost hunting in the local sanatorium in Madison, Wisconsin, in the woods out back. This was back when Ghost Adventures was just getting big. I was pretty empathic, but at the time, that was about it. So we enter the woods and enter a clearing. On the recorder, I picked up this demonic voice saying, "I'm gonna get ya." It's a chilling recording. It's a hot summer night. The clearing is warm. We talk for a while to whatever is there, and then suddenly, it's not so warm anymore. It's freezing cold and pitch black, like we can see our breath, cold. I even put my hand in front of me to see if I can see it. That's how dark it is. I look up and I can't even see the trees, it's so dark. The negative energy was oppressive. I didn't like it. From the distance, both my friend and I begin to hear the sound of Native American war drums. At first they're faint, then they're getting closer. The overwhelming darkness begins to back off. As the darkness leaves the clearing, I follow the ground to the woods and look up to see a family of deer, complete with a buck, fawn and doe. It took me a while to figure out what was so off about them. It wasn't that they weren't breathing, that they weren't running, that they weren't moving. They were spirits, straight up grey and white, with black eyes. Immediately, I was overcome with such dread, not at the animals, but at whatever it was I could hear behind us. Whatever had leaves and twigs crunching under its feet. The doe nodded at me. A rush of wind kicked up around us. The drums were now at an all-time high, and the chanting was stroking an urgency in my veins that made me grab my friend and run away. I checked in with my friend to confirm the details of the story, as it happened 10 plus years ago. She remembers all the same things. I remember there also being an owl and a squirrel. I later found out that this was the site of one of the Native American wars. After doing some research, I believe I saw totems sent to protect me and my friend, or guard the land. Whether they were from my tribe or the ones that died there, I don't know. I'm just wondering what anyone else here thinks. Has anyone else experienced something similar in those woods? My friend and I believe someone was possibly there to harm us. Possibly a person drawn to dark energy. I'm not sure. All I can say is that she and I 100% heard and saw the same things. And it's absolutely the most vivid paranormal experience I've ever had. It sounded like an entire Native American army going to war. Also at the time, there were no events scheduled to explain this drumming.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
When I was young, I was a very awkward kid. I had a lot of difficulty making and keeping friends. I spent most of my time hiking outside of my hometown in the Angeles National Forest. I lived with my grandmother in the town of Wrightwood. I would spend most of my nights out camping, claiming to be going on small trips with my Boy Scout troop, when in reality, I would just take my backpacking tent and find a nice secluded canyon to sleep in. Whenever I would sleep in the canyon, I would have strange but comforting dreams. where my childhood dog, Shelby Lynn, would come find me in the woods, huddle up in my sleeping bag to stay warm, and I would talk to her throughout the night about my woes and my accomplishments. It always felt surreal when I woke up and she wasn't there, so I tried to go back as often as possible just so I could see her again, all the way up until I turned 16. I stopped coming to the mountains as often because I was spending a lot of time with my girlfriend down in the high desert. One day, about a year into our relationship, I decided to take her hiking up one of my favourite canyons. About halfway up the canyon, she slipped and badly twisted her ankle. It was swollen to the size of a grapefruit. I asked her to let me carry her back down, or to let me tear a piece of my shirt to use as a sling, but she refused, so we continued down. About 10 minutes into our hike down, she said she saw something. I asked her what it was, and she said she didn't know, just movement in her peripherals. Then about 5 seconds later, something scared her so badly, she almost fell again. I took her back home and we treated her ankle with a sling and a compression wrap. To this day, she still refuses to acknowledge what happened, and I think that's perhaps for the best. When I was 17, we eventually broke up. Her mother had gotten into an accident drink driving, and she was forced to move in with her grandparents. We couldn't keep up the long-distance relationship. I continued going to the mountains for 2 more relationships and 2 more years, but I never brought somebody to the mountains with me during that time. I simply spent half my free time with my boyfriend or girlfriend, and the other half in the mountains, dreaming of my childhood dog in bliss. When I was 19, I met a girl who really understood me as a person. Foolishly, I thought that meant she might understand what was happening to me in those mountains. I told her all about my dreams and all about what happened to my first ex. She wanted to try to see for herself. We left at about 8 p.m. and arrived at the base of my favourite canyon at about 9 p.m. My then girlfriend and I went hiking up with flashlights and some camping gear, hoping to spend the night. We spent a good 20 minutes setting up a site where I cleared all the flammables in a 5-foot radius and started cooking in my jet boil. We had some dinner, although I can't remember what we ate. I think we just Uncle Ben's rice and some bread. Then we decided to walk around some more. About 20 minutes into this hike, she stopped dead in her tracks. She had seen something moving, just like my first ex. She looked at me and asked me if I saw it too. I hadn't. Then she took another look and let out a small whisper of a scream. She grabbed me and asked me to take her back to our camp so we could leave. Later, she described to me a scraggly, dark, long-haired dog that looked to be about as tall as her and covered in mange and forest debris. She told me it grinned at her and that its mouth looked almost human. She begged me to never go back there again. She told me whatever was up there wasn't a friend, and that I should never have let it into my life in the first place. I believed her at the time, but now 5 years out of that forest, and 1 year out of our rocky relationship, I miss the forest more than anything else. I miss my dreams, and I miss the feeling of ease and bliss I got from being there. I want almost more than anything to go back there and spend a night, just to feel like that again. Safe, comfortable, and carefree. Should I go back? Maybe just for 1 night. Or was she right? Is there something here that's dangerous? And if so, why has it never seemed dangerous to me? Why do I feel safest when I'm there?
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
So as usual, I went to sleep fairly late in my apartment and slept rather well throughout the night. I woke up a few times, but that's just because I'm a light sleeper and a lucid dreamer, and sometimes I just lose control of a dream, and that tends to wake me up. I had a free day yesterday, knowing that I didn't set any alarms, so I slept for about 9 hours and then I woke up. Well, I kind of woke up. You know that feeling you have just before you wake up, like you're not even sure where or who you are? I couldn't open my eyes. I felt as if a big hand or something that felt like a hand was holding my face from the bottom up, right in a position it could easily choke me if it wanted to. I tried to move or open my eyes, but the more I fought, I felt like the whole area I felt the thing went more and more dead and numb. I felt like a million little needles poking me all at once, but not in a painful, more like a tickling way. I felt it turn my head to the left, and I think, somehow I knew it was studying me, looking me up and down. Now when I say it, I'm not sure if I even believe it was a creature or whatever. I'm not to believe in these things so easily, but I'm a lucid dreamer and I know when I'm dreaming and when I'm awake. Also, this is the second time something like this has happened, but let me finish this encounter first. I didn't hear or see or smell anything while it happened. I just felt the pressure on my face and slightly my neck and a sort of wariness around it, like it was a living thing. Now it's not one of those stories I have heard when it felt like it took hours and the people couldn't fight back. I kept on trying to move, and after about 10 seconds, maybe 20, I managed to open my eyes and I saw nothing. Nothing out of the ordinary. Just my dimly lit room and the streetlight barely peeking through from between the curtains. I turned my light on and I didn't see or feel anything weird. As weird as it sounds, I went straight back to sleep. With the light on this time. I've been thinking about it a lot recently though, and I figured I'd put it out here somewhere so people may theorise what it could have been, and what I might be able to do to prevent it from happening again, because it wasn't pleasant. As for the first time I mentioned it happened, it was a few years ago and thousands of miles from my current residence. About 3 years ago, I was at a friend's house and I decided to stay the night. This was back from where I moved from after about a year after this. My friend told me I could sleep in his big guest bedroom and he'll go sleep in his room, so that's what we did. I went to sleep and I kept having this weird feeling, like there was something else in the room with me. Being a non-believer, I figured it was a rat or something behind the old furniture my friend had. After about an hour of struggling to fall asleep, I started to feel really cold. Even under 2 layers of blankets, I was freezing. I curled up in a ball in hopes of warming myself up, and after a few more minutes of trying to fall asleep, this weird feeling became unnervingly, for the lack of a better word, scary. It felt like a primal kind of fear that I've always had, but never experienced before. Then I started to finally snooze off. This is when I felt a chill run down my spine, and I swear I felt something quickly pass over my body. At the same time, I swear I heard a loud whisper, like a really loud whisper. It wasn't a word or a cry or anything like most people say. It was more of a sigh, but like a really loud one, directly into my ear. I also felt pressure on my back for just a moment. This all happened in like 2 seconds, and it made me jolt up in shock. I turned on the light and stayed up as long as I could. Nothing else weird happened that night or since. Well, until now. I'm not even sure why I'm writing this. I'm sure most people who will read this will think it's fake, and those who do believe me might just not know how to help. I'm telling you it's not fake. Both things happened. I wasn't dreaming, it wasn't sleep paralysis. I'd know. What it was, I don't know. Again, I'm not really a believer in the paranormal. It might just be my head playing tricks on me, but it sure as hell felt real. So, this is me being open to suggestions, I guess. What do you guys think this is? And how can I get rid of it?
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
So I grew up in the small town of Hot Springs, South Dakota. I lived there until I was 5 years old. We lived in a small 3-bedroom house that was built in the 1800s. I remember vividly many strange things that happened, and my parents do also. I remember once, I was sitting on the couch in the living room and was about to go into my room to grab a toy. The room was to the left of the front door walking in, and there was a faint light cast on the bedroom wall from a street lamp outside. The curtains were closed, so it was a fuzzy but semi-bright glow. As I was walking towards the room, a shadow of a man started to cross through the light. I thought it was a shadow from someone walking on the street. However, as I looked at it, this man waved at me, and it felt like it looked right at me. It was completely harmless, and didn't scare me as it seemed friendly, and I was a young kid at the time who didn't even know what ghosts were. I remember that so clearly. I once got a lava lamp, a real fancy tall yellow one. I loved it so much. Except one night, I was sleeping on the top bunk of my bed, and I heard a loud bang. I looked down, and the lava lamp is sitting perfectly upright in the middle of the room on the floor. It was unplugged from the wall. It turns out that the lamp broke, and my parents still blame me. I know what I saw, though, and can't explain how it ended up where it did. Upright, without any obvious damage. It just never turned back on. It was weird, and made me sad, too. There was one time I saw a chandelier-looking orb thing come out of my wall at night and float into my bed, and then my blankets got pulled back a little. That was all that happened, but it scared me enough to get my parents. There was nothing off in my room, but it was a weird occurrence. The house had an old mudroom near the back, connected to the kitchen. It was open to the outside, and that's where our dogs would sleep. We had 3 dogs, a young golden, a young Italian greyhound, and another young furry dog that I forgot the breed of. I walked outside during the day once, and I heard a voice coming from a vent. All 3 of the dogs lined up and sat down. The voice was speaking to them. It sounded like a really old woman with a rough voice. It was speaking past me and to the dogs, like it had no idea I was there. I can't remember what it said, but it asked the dogs questions and they all barked at the same time as an answer. It was truly bizarre. It scared the piss out of me, and I ran to get my dad. He brushed it off, but it was weird. Maybe it was a dream, though. Another time, on my 4th birthday, I got this awesome SpongeBob balloon. One of the foil ones from the store. I woke up at night to the balloon pressed pretty hard against the ceiling, and it was slowly dragging across it towards the door, but it was moving like a snail. It scared me so much, I ran and got my parents. Obviously they were pissed since it was the middle of the night, but my dad got up to check anyway. He actually saw the same thing, and watched the balloon pull itself under the door frame and into the living room. That scared the shit out of him, and he immediately popped it and threw it away. He and I still remember that to this day, and can't explain it. My parents said that they encountered many weird things as well. I had a little toy that would talk if you pressed buttons, and they said every time they would walk into the room, the toy would say, "Hello there," which happened if you pressed a button. When they left, it would say, "Goodbye, friend." They hated that toy. My grandma had the same thing happen to her and hated it. It wasn't motion activated or anything. That furry dog would also growl a lot at night, and my parents found it locked in a closet multiple times. No idea how the dog got in there, but it did. That dog ended up attacking me one day, nearly ripping my eye out. We obviously put it down. But I find it strange how that was the only dog that ever growled for no reason, and got locked into random closets. I know that's a lot of stuff, but it's all very clear to me. I know I was young, but they're such clear memories, and my parents can back me up with the weird things that happened. The house also had the previous owner die in it before they bought it. That's not unusual for the area, as there is an old town that housed the VA, so many people died all over in many houses. I personally think that whatever was in there was totally harmless and wanted to protect me, and my very young sister at the time. Nothing was ever done to harm us, but with the friendly wave and the communication through the toy, and the way it locked up the dog that eventually attacked me and broke a possible dangerous lamp, is kind of soothing to think back to. I wanted to share these memories and ask if this stuff seems believable. I know I was really young, so it might not be real.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
So when I was in high school, my friends and I were really into spooky shit that we had no business messing around with. We would visit cemeteries at night, go to our small town's local haunt spots to try to stir up any urban legends. But the story I'm about to tell made us quit cold turkey, trying to seek out the paranormal. One night, we were over to our friend's century-old home. I mean, it was old and creaky, and the perfect setting for a night of Ouija. We brought it out, and for the first half hour, nothing insane happened. Just some movement from the planchette. Then, feeling smug, I asked the spirits what my middle name was. The thing is, my middle name is literally made up by my parents. It's not a real name. No one in the circle knew, let alone could spell my middle name. There was literally no way someone could even guess it. But the board knew. It spelled my middle name perfectly, and I could feel my heart fall into my gut. Keep in mind, my hands were not on the planchette, so I couldn't have moved it myself. Everyone laughed because what a silly middle name that would be, but I had to confess that it was mine. and the colour drained from everyone's faces. All of a sudden, a glass ashtray that was sitting a few feet away on the coffee table split clean in two, and we were done. We left the house to go stay somewhere else, and fortunately, I've never experienced anything that terrifying again.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
Back in 2017, during the solar eclipse, it was a kind of a celebration day in the US. The eclipse was set to happen at midday where I was. My co-workers and I were encouraged to step outside when the eclipse started and see it. I went out and saw the eclipse with everyone. Then I went back in and was going to go back to work, but for some reason I went back out. There were still a few people standing around. I looked up again and I sensed a powerful entity up there travelling with the eclipse. It wasn't visual, it was just a strong impression. In my mind's eye, I sensed the spirit was travelling with the eclipse and taking notes of all the abuses that people have inflicted. I sensed it was a spirit of revenge. It was going to take revenge for the abuses. Anyway, it was working very fast, like it was looking down at the population in large swathes. I guess it sensed me looking at it, and it saw me too. I didn't get the impression it had a lot of time to stop and think about someone like me. It was a short experience. It left a strong impression on me though. Even if part of that impression is that the day-to-day life of humans is barely a blip on the radar to angels. And I'm irritated, since I'm not some spiritual person. I feel like there should be a spiritual person who saw it, with everyone looking at the eclipse. I mentioned it briefly that day to 2 people on Facebook who can read my posts, and I told my mom. I also searched Twitter and mentioned it there some months ago. On some level, I was waiting for someone important to say something.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
Last night, I was getting ready for bed, and as I lay down, I was finishing up a YouTube video that I was watching. When finished, I leaned over the side of my bed to plug in my phone, after setting my alarm for the morning. When I rolled back over to have my nightly prayer, I noticed a black mass over my body. It was a black fog that was partially transparent, but it felt heavy and had a density to it. It felt like a very negative energy mass floating above me. I immediately sat up in my bed, and I noticed that I started to feel high, as if I'd taken a drug or something. It felt like a head rush, and it kept getting stronger and stronger. At the same time, I noticed multiple different frequencies started ringing in my ears, very loudly. There were at least 3 different pitched frequencies I was hearing ring in my ears. And no, it wasn't just my tinnitus picking up. I have tinnitus and my ears ring 24/7 at the same pitch every single day, so I'm very aware of that. This was multiple different frequencies layered on top of one another. It almost felt as if something was trying to make contact with me. So I decided to turn on the light in my room and use the bathroom, because I have a bad habit of slamming water before I go to bed. I checked both of the doors to make sure they were locked, and got back to my bedroom to lay down again and see if the energy was still there. As soon as I turned off the lights again and lay down in my bed, I felt the same negative energy vacating my room. By the way, at this point, and also while I was going to the bathroom and walking around my house, the loud ringing in my ears continued and hadn't stopped. I also said to myself as I was walking to the bathroom, what the fuck is that noise? If there's anything trying to contact me, I cannot hear what you're saying, and this is just annoying and doesn't feel good. I feel sick from this, and this is only disturbing me and not making any sense. So please stop. So there I was, laying down for a second time and still feeling almost sick, with loud noises in my ears and feeling a negative energy in my room. And that's when I started to pray and ask God for help. I repeated over and over that we do not allow any negative energy in this house, and we only allow love and positivity in this house, and anything other than that needs to leave at once. I repeated this for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, as I also envisioned a white light in my head, beaming all throughout my room. I envisioned every room in the house and shining a white light throughout the entire thing, while I continued chanting for anything negative to leave, and also asking for God to rid anything negative. As I envisioned this white light beaming through the house, the colour white in my head would get brighter and brighter and feel stronger and stronger. After that, 5 or 10 minutes of doing this, the energy in the house had completely shifted. It felt lighter. The negativity was gone. I didn't feel nauseous anymore, and there was finally silence in my ears. I knew that my efforts had finally worked. And then after a few more minutes, I started to feel warmth and good energy in my room. It made me feel safe and welcoming to fall asleep. That's when I finally felt like it was safe and comforting to fall asleep. And so I did. One last detail I just remembered is that I have our house's washer and dryer in my room because that's the only hookup spot. Fucking annoying. And my roommate was in my room yesterday night doing laundry. So I'm going to have a talk with him later today and ask him if he has any negative thoughts or energy around him while he was in my room where I sleep, while he was doing laundry. Because I can't control this energy before he goes into my room. But I can have a talk with him about it for next time. I know it sounds crazy, but I've been having experiences like this my entire life. I'm now 28 years old, but when I was a kid, I remember hearing voices and seeing shadows all the time at relatives' houses. And throughout my adult life, I've had extremely similar situations to the ones I've just described here. That's why I knew to ask for God's help and to envision a white light over my house. Earlier in life, I would have just given up and fallen asleep with the negativity in my room, feeling scared. But since this has happened multiple times, I now know the steps it takes to rid negative energy in my room. I've lived in multiple states, Michigan, Tennessee, and Florida as of the last 10 years, and I've had the craziest and most reoccurring experiences while living in Tennessee, and secondly in Michigan, but almost none in Florida. Which is interesting, because I lived alone in Florida and always had roommates while in the other states. So maybe it does have something to do with other people's energy, and maybe I'm just more sensitive to it. Has anyone had a similar experience to this? Like I said, similar things have been happening to me for the better part of my life, and every time I tell friends or family about it, they can't relate to me.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
I was 8 and woke from a vivid nightmare around 4 AM. I lay awake for a while and was spooked from the dream and couldn't get back to sleep. So I decided to go downstairs and watch TV until it was time to get ready for school. I was sitting on the sofa facing the TV. The door upstairs was to the right of the TV and had glass panels. As I was watching the TV, I could see out the corner of my eye a light in the doorway to upstairs. I looked towards it and saw this figure. A glowing pale bluish shape with an open robe and hood. No face or features, but 2 eyes brightly shining orange and red. It was beckoning me forward with its left hand, making a "come here" motion with its finger. I don't think I ever felt terror like that before. I slapped my hands to my face and hid my eyes from the figure. I remember feeling trapped, as I didn't want to open my eyes and had nowhere to go. I must have had a rush of adrenaline as I ran with my eyes closed shut, straight back upstairs, passing whatever may have been there in the doorway. I did the standard dive into bed and hid under the covers. I waited until my dad got up for work and remembered to keep going into his room to ask if he was getting up soon. Eventually he woke up and headed downstairs and I followed behind. No sign of anything. My heart was beating and I was still terrified. I followed him all the way through the kitchen to the bathroom and stood virtually behind him as he took his morning pee. I plucked up the courage to tell him what I saw. "Dad, I saw a ghost." He just replied back, "No, you didn't. It was your imagination." And that was that. I'd have been inclined to believe him, as I was a pretty weird kid. I loved horror, monsters, and the paranormal, but I'd never experienced anything like this before. The whole feeling of the night was strange. I remember it now, all these years later, like it was yesterday. I may have thought the nightmare I had sent my imagination into overdrive, that the light was reflecting from the TV onto the glass panels in the doorway, and my overactive brain translated that into this image of a phantom. There's just one thing that doesn't let me dismiss it completely. I found out that when I came downstairs that night, I wasn't alone. Our cat was there too. Fugly. A big silver Persian cat my stepmom owned. My dad thought it was hideous. Hence the name Fugly. This was one of those cats that was so docile and goofy, you could do anything to it and it would just purr. Just didn't seem to have a bad bone in its body. Would let kids pick it up like a rag doll and was super affectionate. I followed my dad out to the bathroom and walked through the kitchen. I spotted Fugly on one of the dining room chairs tucked under the table. I bent down to look at her and she was severely spooked. Her eyes were like saucers and her fur was on its ends. She was nearly twice her size. I did the pss 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 and put my hand towards her. She hissed, scratched my hand and drew a small amount of blood. This really stayed with me as I'd never seen her like this before, and even after, she never displayed this behaviour.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
I moved into my apartment approximately 9 years ago. It was a factory that had been converted into lofts into the early 2010s. I felt compelled to make this post because there have been some limited and strange experiences I've had over the years that led me down the rabbit hole and made me aware of an unsolved murder that occurred on the property in 1998. I'm just wondering if this lines up with any other experiences out there. Shortly after I moved in, I was living on my own and had an experience where I'd fallen asleep in front of the TV. And when I woke up and got up from the couch, I stepped into a thick puddle of liquid that was not there when I fell asleep. The puddle was approximately 30 centimetres in diameter. There was no obvious explanation in terms of air ducts, underlying pipework, and I didn't have any liquids I was drinking that could have fallen over. The liquid wasn't water. It was thick, viscous, and smelled like coconuts, almost like a shampoo. I just cleaned it up, called my parents to see if there could be an explanation, and they said to just monitor, but it could have been a leak elsewhere that moved there. I never experienced anything like this again, but the experience led me to searching online for answers. Online, when I searched the explanations of liquid appearing, it gave me normal answers, but also led me to discussions about poltergeists. To discount it, I basically rationalised that there usually had to be some sort of trauma, and so unless something bad happened on the property, I could likely discount the theory. I can't say I was a true skeptic, but I'm definitely someone who would rather not poke and find things I would rather not find. Long story short, I discovered that my building was previously a factory, and that in 1998 the owner was murdered in the parking lot. The case is still unsolved, although a police officer was quoted in the news as saying that they know who did it, but there wasn't enough evidence to prosecute. When I had discovered this, I kind of made the link and simply mentioned the story to people in the building and friends, and mentioned about the strange liquid appearing. I chalked it up to this murdered soul trying to get some acknowledgement, and ever since I've been telling the story, I haven't had another physical experience, but recently I'm starting to sense I've been getting other experiences. For the past year, whenever I work in my home office where I sit right at the window, closest to the street, I've been having a recurring kind of feeling or sense of getting shot by a gun in the head. Or at least what I imagine it would feel like to get shot. I get this feeling when I'm awake. They aren't dreams. It's like my mind drifts into it. It's hard to explain. It's like the memory of a car coming by and I feel my head clock back violently. This has been a recurring kind of memory or irrational fear that comes and goes. But it's been happening for like a year, and only when it's dark outside. I think it might be the spirit trying to communicate how they felt when they got murdered. When I first researched the murder, I didn't pay attention to where the victim was shot, but I just went back to review the news articles, and they mentioned it was an organised mob hit with a getaway car, and 3 men who shot the victim once in the head and twice in the stomach. I just made the link to the recurring memory and the shot to the head. The murder happened at 7 in the morning, and my stomach tends to randomly hurt at that time for like 30 minutes, and then completely fine for the rest of the day. This isn't every day, but here or there. Has anyone had any similar experiences? Is there anything I could do to put the spirit at ease?
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.